Just another day in the United States of America. Another day of gunfire, panic, and fear.
That was the BBC explaining to its viewers how common gun violence has become in the United States. Let's show you a recent poll. It found that Americans are more worried about being a victim of gun violence than a terror attack. So why is gun violence such a big problem in the United States? We put the question to Bobby Ghosh. He is our CNN Global Affairs analyst, managing editor of Quartz. He's here to look at some of these facts and figures. We've got a whole lot of statistics, Bobby, to look through. One of the things we have to look at is gun ownership. Let's take a look at what we know about gun ownership in the United States. About a third of households own a gun in America. If you exclude the number of people who own over 25 guns, the average gun owner in the United States has an average of 5 guns. How does that line up with the rest of the world in terms of gun ownership?
Well, most countries where people do own guns, they tend to own fewer guns per person than the United States. But that is a function of a couple of things. One is the United States is a rich country. People can afford to buy more guns. But perhaps more importantly, it's easier to buy a gun in the United States than most countries.
Our
most
laws
comparable
are more lax about gun ownership.
Absolutely. In most Western countries, most developed countries, to own a gun, you have to go through many hoops, lots of restrictions, lots of registration requirements, which in many parts of the United States is just simply not true. So a person can not only buy a gun, buy multiple number of guns and have them at home.
Well, let's take a look at how the United States stacks up, the countries with the most guns per capita. The United States is number one. It ranks number one in gun ownership. After that, Yemen and Switzerland. What is even more interesting, though, is how you see that in view of the gap between number one and number two. This is really significant and kind of startling. And analyze this for us. 88.8 guns in the United States per 100 people. For second place Yemen, that drops down to 54.
Again, you have these two, the second and third place sort of tell the story of ease of access and the cost of owning a weapon. Yemen's one of the poorest countries in the world. So people who own guns are not going to be able to afford very many of them, and therefore you're much more likely to have one gun per family or for several people, whereas in the United States, being a much richer country, people can afford more.
I think people might be surprised by Switzerland.
Switzerland is a richer country, I think, per capita than the United States.
We don't think of it as a violent nation.
We don't think of them as violent, but there is a correlation. Switzerland has the highest number of guns per capita in Western Europe. Switzerland also has the highest proportion of gun violence, deaths due to gun violence in Western Europe. They don't compare themselves to us because we're off the charts, but they do compare themselves with Germany, with France, with Britain, and Switzerland is off the charts compared with them. And there's a lot of anxiety in Switzerland. We don't hear of it, but in Switzerland there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of debate about whether they should allow these many guns. But again, in Switzerland, part of the reason why the ownership is low is access. It's not easy to buy a gun if you're Swiss.
Well, I want to look to gun violence, and obviously we're going to compare apples to apples because we have to compare the United States with a country like the United States that compares to it in life expectancy, education, and income. So we're using the UK as an example here. The United States has 90 guns for every 100 people, 9 deaths per 100,000 people, while in the UK, 6 guns for every 100,000 people and less than 1 death per 100,000 people. What does that tell you?
Well, there is something to be said about a gun culture and how common guns are and how commonly guns are used. In the UK, it's worth remembering that even the police, very few policemen in Britain carry guns. Yeah. Even a lot of criminal gangs, in their criminal activity, they don't use assault weapons. And people can own guns, but the difference between owning a shooting rifle, a hunting rifle, and being able to buy a semi-automatic, never mind an automatic, is a huge gap there. There are not a lot of people in the UK or in Europe in general who can have easy access to automatic weapons. This talks a little bit to a gun culture, and you need to be a sociologist.
That is the part that I think so many are struggling with, is that we see the numbers, we see the data, we understand there are many people who believe they have a right to, we have a right to have, to bear arms in this nation. But what is the idea of what the cause is for all of this violence? Well,
it's a large country and different people buy guns for different reasons, but there's a large number of Americans who own weapons out of a sense of fear. They own it because they're worried that somebody might come and try to take away bearing arms themselves, from them what is precious and dear to them, their life, their liberty, their possessions, their family. So a lot of people own guns out of a sense of fear and for security reasons. In many of these countries, in Switzerland, for instance, sports shooting, target shooting is a very, very popular activity, and people own guns
for that reason, not for protection. The fear is the concern, because right now there's certainly a whole lot of that. Bobby, thanks for crunching through some of these numbers with us. We appreciate it. All right, we have a lot of news to get to.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.